What were your first experiences like with cannabis?
Because when I was, a teenager, there was a lot less to do. We weren't connected to, all our friends and the world around us, and all the information the world has to offer through a device, a handheld device. So we basically had sex, drugs, and rock and roll to entertain ourselves. And cannabis was, you know, I did, I got into it because my older brothers both smoked cannabis. And it seemed like the thing to do. And, it was a little bit decadent and my friends wanted to do it. So, we acquired some and got high and probably didn't get high the first couple times. And like, people have that reaction where it doesn't work on me. But it did. And, the first time it really did, we were just laughing ourselves silly. And, it was a pretty great feeling. So, it continued on from there.
Have your thoughts on cannabis changed since your first consumption experiences?
100%. So, it's gone from just getting high to sort of a purpose-driven recreational experience. I've always liked the mind expansion qualities, even as a teenager, but as an adult, it's much more focused. I use cannabis for work, for empathy, for focus, um, for going really deep inside problems. I use it for human connection and to make non-linear connection, putting ideas together in new ways. So it's really, for me, it's really like a productivity and enhancement tool that I use in a lot of areas of my life, but I've continually used it for ideation at work.
Is it those shifts in benefits that got you interested in becoming an advisor and business owner within the cannabis sector?
Well, very authentic and sincere love of the plant and a desire to see, you know, the cannabis business evolve both responsibly and informatively is really, one of the reasons I got into it. My career has been in launching new business categories as CMO of MySpace, early in social media, publishing some of the first professional blogs like Engadget and Joystick, building some of the first, helping to build some of the first subscription fashion businesses like Fabletics with Kate Hudson and Rihanna's Savage by Fenty. So, I've always wanted to, help lay the foundation for the long-term cannabis business. I never really imagined, I hoped, but didn't imagine it would become legal. I still walk into a cannabis dispensary and I'm kind of freaked out by like that I can actually buy all this product. It's really amazing. So I wanted to give back something that's given me so much. But also wanted to make sure that this business evolves, in a safe, responsible way. It can, it can be screwed up. I wanted to be part of the solution and make sure that because say to less of a degree, but also like in the early days of the internet business, which I was also early pioneer in that. If someone made a mistake, it was a mistake for everyone. You know, all boats rise with the tide. So being a part of the early cannabis business was about really setting the stage and foundation for something to scale in a meaningful way.
When it comes to the long-term value, what is important to focus on when it comes to cannabis consumption in the business sector?
There's a bunch of different aspects to that, but as cannabis becomes legal, there needs to be rules and guidelines on how we use cannabis, how it integrates into our culture, and even our work society. We tend to take the rules of alcohol and apply them to cannabis, but that's not really a perfect analogy. There's some good analogies on the business side for distribution, regulation, but as far as how the psychopharmacological pharmacological impact of the drug on your mind and how it affects how people, operate and think, it's very different. One's a depressant, one's a psychoactive. So some analogies make sense, but when it comes to when I was at Lowell Herb Co., we were trying to set rules for cannabis usage at work. The CEO of the company didn't really smoke cannabis, so he was like, it was weird. There were, he was thinking about a, no cannabis at work rule, which seemed inane to me, as a cannabis company. Now, cannabis affects people in different ways. So some people can smoke it and be high functioning. Some people can smoke it and, they can't do their job. So it's really about, the individual, and it's tough to set rules for that. Ultimately, it's about performance, and that depends on your job. I'm not someone who can perform really at a high level on cannabis at work. There's some functions that I'm great at. The creativity aspect, I'm great, but for me, it impairs, critical thinking, it impairs communication and sometimes collaboration. So, and those are a big part of what I have to do every day. So I analyze my cannabis use, but I know so many people where, they just excel in a lot of areas. They can work on, I can't even deal with like a Excel spreadsheet when I'm high. And I know some people who just like love it and go deep inside of it. So it's really a case by case basis, but ultimately in the end, it's about, is this person, performing or not performing, no matter what they're doing.
We love that Pilgrim Soul has found a way to combine data and expert knowledge to tap into creativity and play. Can you tell us a little bit about how Pilgrim Soul came to be?
That's a good question. So, the whole Pilgrim Soul brand and all the products we create is really from a lifelong experience of using cannabis and really living in a creative space. So, and many of my friends would say I've been training for this role my entire life. I've been kind of known as the stoner, I guess, which has mostly negative connotations, I would say, in society, but also as a original thinker, someone who's used creative thinking to differentiate myself in my professional life. The idea to build this company is to help people hack their creativity. Cannabis is an amazing creative hack. It's like, but it's not, it's not the only hack. We like a lot of the products that we have cannabis products. Clearly those are focused on cannabis, but the journals and things we do are, we say, please use this journal while you are high, and they're created to be used while you're high. The way we sort of write the instructions and the fun, whimsical exercises we create are certainly fun to do while you're high, but you can get high or get your flow state from meditation, from exercise, from yoga, from travel, or even a combination of all those things. So it's not only about using cannabis, but it is really about getting into flow state.
Can you tell us a little bit about optimizing human creative performance to gain competitive edge? What is human creative performance and how can it be strengthened?
A really great question, because people get caught up in the definition of creativity. And that's where I read a lot of research on creativity and a lot of research on cannabis and creativity. And, they vary in different ways, and you have to take them with a grain of salt, because everyone is defining creativity differently. The classic definition of creativity, is to create something new and useful. But it's really so much more than that. Like happiness, it's more of a way of traveling than a destination. Creativity is an individual thing. It's about, opening up the aperture of understanding and seeing things in new ways. So, It's about empathizing with others, experiencing new feelings, self-expression, making nonlinear connections, or experimenting, reinventing, breaking rules, and making mistakes and having fun. But it's what makes us different from animals. Creativity, also to be able, the desire to have sex without actually making a baby is another thing that differentiates it. But creativity is a big part of it, and it's going to become creativity is going to become more and more and more important as this world evolves, especially in consideration of artificial intelligence and outsourcing and abundance of choice. Creativity is really something that is going to be, an essential skill for any human being now, and more so in the future.
If you could bottle your dream, goal, or impact for Pilgrim Soul into a sentence or two, what would they be?
100% to help people rethink the way they see themselves in the world around them, and to uncover new possibilities and ideas. As a business, that's how we keep score other than money. It's helping people unlock their innate creativity. We get so much mail from people who use our journals. We get thousands of messages a month, and that's, about people just coming out of a creative rut, or seeing things in a different way, or connecting with someone, or using the journal with a husband or a wife or a girlfriend and seeing how they see the world by their answers. Or even like in this time, a bunch of emails from people who were in the hospital, and it's just like, with their mother or grandmother or someone, and this like help them get through it, or, reflect. So all that stuff, is really the reward that this brand brings to us, and why the people who work here continually do it. And what's great is, we just launched this company. It's only 4 months old, and the impact we're making is pretty significant, and we're really just getting started, which brings so much joy to me.
We love that your creative journal provides educational and accessibility pathways to cannabis creativity. What are your hopes when it comes to cannabis normalization and stigma change?
Well, it's important to normalize things. There's certainly been a very false narrative around cannabis for the last 70 years. Prior to that, cannabis was a medicine, and there was no stigma around it. And for the last 70 years, it's been illegal. And that was really, as a lot of your listeners probably know, it's really about repression, to repress African Americans, Black people, and it was really driven by propaganda. So that's awful, and there's not been a ton of damage that's been done as a result of that. So undoing that is a big important part of normalizing it. And then allowing people to use plant medicine without feeling guilty, without the stigma behind it. It's still, if you're an addict, there's still, cannabis can be bad, and anything can be bad. Food can be bad, gaming can be bad. There's so many things that can be bad for you. So moderation and constructive use of cannabis is still exceptionally important, but normalizing that and making it acceptable to tap into the benefits of cannabis and sort of get rid of some of the negative history of cannabis is really super important.
Have you faced any stigma because you're a member of the cannabis community, or because you work in the cannabis sector? If so, how have you addressed it?
For sure. I'm definitely known as a cannabis smoker. I've never hidden it. That, along with being an unconventional thinker, brings criticism from closed-minded people. People tend to criticize what they don't understand. I really just lead by example in my life and let the results talk for them. So, that's not only about work. It's about relationships and raising children and being a great friend, and living a healthy lifestyle. People are like, sure, he's successful. He has a great relationship with his wife. He has well-adjusted, polite, and personable children, but he smokes weed. Maybe we can hate him for that. So, we all need to just live by example. There was this entrepreneur that I would run into who she would just always talk about behind my back for some reason. That like, he's such a stoner. Like, he's a stoner that's helped launch, a big part of social media, that's launched blogs. It's like, I think it was more about envy of my success and trying to find fault. You're all, I used to say that I'm at the point in my life where I'm successful enough to have haters, but not successful enough to be successful.
We love that your products use real facts, data, and research. Why has it been important to you to bring experts and top minds into your process?
Though I'm promoting this, I'm certainly, creativity and cannabis and the importance of creativity, I'm not, really making it up. This is the creative movement and a need for it is outlined in really the most popular TED Talk of all time by a guy named Sir Kenneth Robinson. He's got a TED Talk called How Schools Have Killed Creativity, and we desperately need to bring it back. It's the #1 TED Talk. And then a big part of this whole movement was influenced by a book I read in the year 2000 by a guy named Richard Florida called Rise of the Creative Class, and how we've gone from an industrial age to an information age to a creative age, where our economy is propelled forward by creativity and technology. So things like Tesla would be, mobile art and technology, and Peloton would be certainly content, and technology. So, we've, the importance of creativity is, I've just been reading so much about it. And so I'm trying to kind of make Pilgrim Soul a repository for this knowledge, to help people distill it, but most importantly, put these sort of ideas into usable and actionable information. Because, it's enough to read about things and know they're true, but to act on them is often really much, much harder. I'm just one person. The program is much more powerful when you understand why the history of creativity in cannabis, case studies that support the premise of the business. Another study besides Richard Florida that really switched me onto this was reading about this study by George Land in the 1960s. He was a scientist. Well, he was hired by NASA to identify their most creative scientists to put them on innovation projects. So he developed this test for them, for the NASA scientists, based on divergent thinking. And he gave this test to 1,600 5-year-olds, kindergartners, and 95% of kindergartners tested expert level creative.
Wow.
And then 5 years later, he gave the same test to the same kids when they were in the 6th grade, and something like 20% of them tested expert level creative. It was just a faction, or a byproduct of our education system. We have this education system built. Really, the modern education system was formalized in the early 20th century for the industrial age to really teach people about siloed thinking. And, mistakes are bad, artists don't make any money, and a ton of other things sort of move us away from creativity. And to this day, when we cut budgets in schools, the creative programs are the first things we cut. And it's contrary to the skills that we're going to need to succeed. And, if you have a 10-year-old kid today who's going to be 30 in the year 2040, you want to teach him collaboration skills, communication skills, critical analysis, and creativity. those are, I don't know what the job they'll be doing in the year 2040, but those are definitely skills that will be needed.
For someone just starting to tap into creative exploration or play with or without CANNA consumption, do you have any advice for getting started?
Well, for sure. Like, we are all born creative, as I sort of just illustrated in that, George Land study, we're all born creative. So the Pilgrim Soul brand is not about teaching people to be creative as much as it's about unlocking your innate creativity and getting past those blocks. As far as using cannabis and creativity, my advice would be to start slow. Studies show that low dosage is better for creativity than high dosage. It's really about enhancing the experience, not being the experience. That's why you hear so much about microdosing. Small amounts of psilocybin can make you much more present and switched on, and the same goes for cannabis. Mindset is also important. Being in a good environment and a good headspace when you're using cannabis creativity is important. And the Pilgrim Soul Journal is kind of part of that. We created them as guardrails on the experience. You can smoke you can smoke the best creative, strain and still think about, whatever's stressing you out. Doesn't mean you're going to have a creative experience. So we created the journals to kind of put guardrails on that experience and help you really focus your attention and, focus that creativity and have a positive outcome. It's also important to know that using cannabis does not mean that all your ideas will be great ideas. It's more about, that's not really the point. The point is to be creative. The point is about idea production and creative flow. Some of those ideas may be genius. Probably most of them will be awful. But it's better to have 10 ideas than no ideas, or several highly inhibited ideas. So that's kind of my advice on using cannabis for creativity: is take it slow, build up. You can always smoke more. You can't smoke less. Being patient with yourself and being patient with the process is important. Like, cannabis is great. The cannabis stimulates the activity in the frontal lobe, so where a lot of idea generation happens. So the idea is to kind of not repress things and let things flow openly, and see what happens and not judge yourself. That's one of the biggest problems with cannabis is, often I'll tell people to avoid any judgments for the first 20 minutes. Like, that's when people start get paranoid and start to spiral in the wrong direction. And even myself, sometimes I will smoke and be higher than I actually want to be. And at that point, I will relax. I'll drink some water. I'll just breathe, and I just won't sort of judge myself. I'll let myself sort of just catch the wave. And inevitably, pretty much 100% of the time, I do catch that wave and end up having a great creative experience. But I do see it going wrong when people are like, I don't feel good. This isn't good. I'm paranoid. I knew I was going to get paranoid. And then it just goes in this spiraling in the wrong direction. You have to not judge yourself. I mean, you're high. This is not who you really are. You can't judge yourself in the context of reality when you're altering reality.
Do you have any favorite journal exercises that really get your creativity flowing, or that were really fun to think up and create?
It's hard to say because I like different exercises at different times. And then also with different people. So there's the word links exercise, which I really like to do with friends. And that exercise is we give you two seemingly unrelated words, and you have to connect them. You have to make a bridge with 4 to 5 words to sort of make some connection. So it might be squirrel and tambourine, or hooker and hot sauce, or senator and duck. And you have to like, what is the bridge between those two? And it's really fascinating to see the connections that people make. I'm like, that's how you got between senator and duck? That's how your mind works? You know, so that's always hilarious and interesting to see how people think. So I like that one. The same for the bubble exercise. We have a kind of a funny exercise, which, you know, what are people, it's really about subtext. What are people thinking at this party? You know, and you have all these thought bubbles, and that's kind of funny and fun to see. You know, sometimes I'll pass the journal around and people will just write something in there, and then we'll read out everyone's response. So it, you know, let me see, there's the name brand exercise. So there's an exercise in there where we give you different names, like Donald Lynch, August Gold, Tiffany Briggs are some of the names, and you have to write their person. You have to describe the person. And for me, that is like so easy. Like when someone gives me a name, I see that person vividly in my mind. I can describe what they're wearing, who they are, what they think about, the books they read. For some people, it's not so. It might not be so easy, and that's sort of like an empathy exercise for me. And I really love, empathy. When people ask me what one of, the secrets to my success have been, as a marketer and leading, being chief marketing officer for a lot of big companies, I used to say just empathy. Now in the 21st century, I say data and empathy. But empathy, I really love empathy. I love to empathize with my target audience when I was creating these journals. I would think about, okay, what's the intended reaction here? What's someone going to think and feel when they read this? Are they going to think this is fun? Is it going to be easy? They're high, so they're not going to want a lot of instructions. Is this easy to understand? Is it funny? Do they want to share this? So, there's a bit long-winded answer on that question, but so the great thing about the journal, there's really no wrong or right way to use it. You can open it up to any page, and that was the point. When I was talking to some editors, they're like, you should make this more structured where people can follow this, and they take steps 1, 2, and 3. It's like, that is not going to be fun for someone who's high. They need to open this up to any page on any day at any moment and experience the serendipity of the journal. And there's really no rules to using it. There are certainly exercises to follow. The only thing that we ask is that you use it creatively. And that means however you want to use it.
Have you experienced benefits from cannabis consumption outside of creativity?
So the benefits I get mostly, which I just talked about, and which I also still define as creativity, is empathy. I really find it, but a great specific example would be sort of understanding my wife and my relationships, and myself in my relationships. I use cannabis. It allows me to step back and look at motivations. And, I'm more apt to see all sides of an issue if I'm high. I'm also more likely to admit that I'm wrong, as opposed to defending myself. Like when people, attack you, your natural inclination is to defend yourself, whether you're right or wrong. But when I'm high, I'll really take a concerted glance at their perspective and their motivation. And especially in like arguing with my wife, like I'll be like, sometimes she'll say something to me and she'll just be 100% right. If I'm not high, I might like, you're the jerk. But if I am, I'll be like, wow, I can't believe I did that. Like, and then I'll totally diffuse the situation and apologize. And then, in certain situations, she'll be even more mad because she wanted to fight and I've just like taken the air out of it. But, that's love, and that's relationships. So, and the other thing would be like when my kids were younger, um, I used cannabis to connect with them. Like it was not, playing with my children when I was just a little bit high. Obviously, being totally stoned, it's, I'm disconnected, but just being a little high allowed me to empathize with them and see the world from their perspective and get on their level. And they would just completely fascinate me. And it's something that I found really hard to do just in my daily grind. We're all distracted. This is happening, that's happening. We need to deal with this issue or that problem. And it was really hard to just get to my kids' level, be focused and be present with them. And cannabis was a great aid for that. And not only in that moment, but it would have, long lasting effects from what I experienced in that moment. So those are a couple. Human connection are some of the ways, outside of general, creativity.
Do you have any tips for people who might need a little extra guidance when it comes to balancing cannabis consumption and productivity?
Sure. I mean, I am that person. So, I have to schedule my cannabis use. I can't, I'm not great at, as I said, working with numbers or I'm definitely not great at multitasking when I'm high. So I have to dedicate a specific time for a creative task. And I get so much enjoyment for that because it's like, okay, this is my time to go deep into this particular problem and, focus on it. And I get to block out things. So, just the enjoyment of blocking things out. There's so many things we have to worry about and deal with. And I'm like, all right, I'm not even gonna think about that for the next hour and a half. Like, that's off limits. Like, even if it wades, back into my mind, I'm just gonna push it back out because this is not that time. So I really enjoy, scheduling a very specific time. For many years, I had this process where I would go to the gym and get high and get on the pre-core machine or the elliptical machine and bring like a deck or something I was working on. And that was just my time to focus on that particular thing. And with a bit of ADD, sometimes when I'm trying to focus on something, there's always something over here that's disturbing me, that's bringing me out. But having this simple thing to focus on, just like, moving up and down on this elliptical machine while I read, my ideas or whatever it is, editing a story or coming up with a strategy for something, it's impossible for me to do three things at once. But to do one simple thing, almost helps me concentrate on the other thing. So it was just a personal hack that I used getting on this. And then I also, will get in shape at the same time while I'm doing creative thinking. So it was a really great creative hack that I love and will probably still get back to when gyms start opening.
What benefits can people tap into by combining cannabis consumption and creative play?
I mean, I really love this, being present for one, like, again, like we're so distracted in this world from news and work and likes and comments. And, we're constantly looking at our phones. Cannabis is really great for idea generation, but it's also great for repression of judgment and helping you go with your gut. There's an area of the brain called the dorsolateral cortex that's connected to planning and inhibition and self-censorship, as well as, cognitive control over our emotions. So slowing that down or deactivating it is something that cannabis does, which plays, it plays a role in daydreaming and meditation and REM sleep. So the way, cannabis does two things really great. It fires the frontal lobe and gets ideas, going, but it also represses areas of the brain that promote, judgment. And those two things together is what really drives creativity and the creative process.
For people just getting started with your journal, what tips would you give them for how to best approach the process?
That's also a good question, because the mindset is like half the experience. There's some rules that you'll see them in the journal, but one of them would be limiting judgment. When using the journal, it's essential to focus on output, let ideas flow, without judgment, see what happens, and you just push yourself and challenge your imagination. Another sort of mindset aspect would be to take more risks. Creative thinking requires a willingness to fail and to make mistakes, and very often the mistakes are the creativity. So you need to lean into that and and definitely not be afraid of making mistakes. Another would be to challenge default thinking. And this is a really important one, because we become so accustomed to doing things a certain way, we lose our ability to break away and think differently. In some sense, we think, okay, I've already thought of that. I know the answer to that. I filed that away. And, when we're asked that question, we serve it up as opposed to reevaluating that question. So, creativity really exists in the balance between the new, the familiar and the new. And it's really important to constantly, certainly be open to new perspective around the same issue. I have this fear that when I stop doing that, it's sort of when I get old. As long as I continue to be open to new ideas and new thinking, I stay young. And so that's an important aspect. Minimizing negative thinking. From an early age, we've learned to analyze and criticize anything new. As an adult, it sort of becomes second nature to criticize something new. So we don't want that to hold people back. And then lastly, the last probably the rule is to go with your gut. If you feel whimsical, be whimsical. If you feel irreverent, then be irreverent. Don't pressure yourself to get things right or be perfect. It's really just, the journal is meant to be a creative experiment within your own mind. So just kind of roll with things. So those are some of the guidelines. And there's other nuanced guidelines that you can, in the front of the book that we sort of to remind you of how to use the product.
What have been the most inspiring moments for you at Pilgrim Soul?
Well, it's over and over. It's the notes that we get from our users about the impact that we're making on our customers. And what's amazing is we're providing the prompts. The impact is coming from themselves. We're just helping them see the world differently, see themselves differently, challenge their perspective, certainly amuse themselves, in some sense, binge watch their own mind and their own creativity. So it's really delightful. We have there's probably, I don't know, maybe 60,000 shares of our advertisements. Like people sharing the ad, like tagging 5 people that need to see this or need to get this. We're having so many people, like the average person buys, I would say, like at least 2 journals. So, people are buying, like their first thought is, I need this and they need this. And they're buying multiple copies for their friends. And that's another really charming thing, because that means that people are using this product to connect with other human beings. And especially in this time when people are so, alone and it's just difficult to make human connection over the last year. So that's probably, that's a big one, the ability to let people connect through creativity and humor. And the books are they're funny. The books are written so they're actually amusing, even if you don't even do the exercises. the exercises are written in kind of a funny way where you think, oh, that, that's a funny way to look at that and a funny way to think about that. And then under each exercise is sort of a why we do this. And that's just an insight about creativity and perspective and how we think. And some of the exercises are so like inane and ridiculous that you wonder, like, how is this ever going to help me with like productive creative thinking? So underneath we tell you, like, okay, I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is how it helps. So, again, it's really the joy and, from this is really about helping people and then them sharing, the impact that is made on their lives. And we have so many celebrities, just there's a ton of just regular people and super creative people. Like, some people write things to me and I'll click on their link and they're this amazing designer, amazing writer, or they're an exceptionally creative person. And I love helping people who aren't creative tap into their innate creativity. But when you meet like a creative expert that you've helped, that's also a different kind of rewarding that we get.
Are there any projects in the works or things coming up in the near future for Pilgrim Soul that you're excited about?
Yes, there's tons of exciting stuff. We have our cannabis products are launching in about a week in California. We have 4 different blends. We have worked with this company, Abstracts Labs, out of Irvine, California. They're a bunch of analytical chemists who work specifically in cannabis. And we have formulated 4 different blends, one for creative imagination, one for creative focus, one for creative reflection, looking inside yourself, and one for creative awareness, which is sort of like riffing on the world around you and tapping into creativity that way. So those are launching, really beautiful. The product is really great. It's a live resin blend. So each blend is a combination of 3 different strains that index high for creativity. And then the packaging is really beautiful, collectible tins. That this first round is a collaboration with 4 different female street artists. You can see them if you go to pilgrimsoulcannabis.com. And they're really, I can't wait for this to get in people's hands and to get feedback from this. And each blend corresponds with a chapter in the journal. In the journal is the creative reflection, creative awareness, creative imagination, and creative focus section. And then I'm also coming out with 4 more journals that focus specifically on those categories. So I'm coming out with a creative awareness journal, creative focus journal, and so on. Then I'm also working on a collaboration with a really well-known, famous Black comedian to do a version of the journal kind of focused on his perspective on creativity and the way he sees the world. And then we're also very close to launching the brand in Nevada. And we'll continue to roll out and do partnership deals with cannabis companies across America to bring the content and cannabis formulas to those states. And there's other stuff, but that's enough. That's enough for now.
As someone who has worked in a variety of impressive high-level roles, what advice can you give to people trying to start a business inside or out of the CANNA sector?
The things that we talked about, in our previous conversation, are tips and tricks and tools to use in business. But as far as someone, I think leading a business or being an exemplary, creative, business leader, I always say to really, treat your people like they're your partners, and to think about how you keep score in your business other than money. What's the impact you make on your customers and your employees? how do you, because I think a lot about brand, and from a brand perspective, I think about, what you do best as a brand, and then what is this cultural tension that's happening in the world, and how those two things can come together to make the world a better place. So, each each company really needs to think about how they can make an impact, what their brand's best self is, and how they can use what they do best, to bring, again, to make this world a better place. It's kind of simple, kind of whimsy, like aspirational and kind of hard to do, but very important.
What are you most excited about when it comes to the future of cannabis?
Access, access to great plant medicine, education about cannabis, and a bunch of research that will be enabled when it's potentially federally legal. Right now the research is really limited. People would even cannabis and creativity. There's limited research on that. It was, I don't know, the research on cannabis and creativity, there's not a lot, and people, even there's some research that, is negative on cannabis and creativity. And to that, I say, look at the case studies. If you, half the songs on Spotify would be gone without cannabis. 75% of the comedies on television, a good portion of the art in the Museum of Modern Art. Lewis Carroll used cannabis, and Robert Louis Stevenson used cannabis, and William Butler Yeats used cannabis. Like, there's so much, so much good that has come from this product. And then lastly, the social justice implications, expungement. There's people who've been incarcerated for years and years and years, where cannabis is now becoming legal. And luckily, we're seeing governments, municipalities, set those people free, expunge their records. So that's another really important aspect of cannabis legalization, is sort of righting some of the wrongs of the past. Those are some pretty important things.
Do you have a favorite strain or consumption method?
Smoking cannabis. I'm a big fan of how nature intended it to be. And I love the full spectrum aspect of cannabis. So I don't like eating cannabis as much, because cannabis treats THC and cannabinoids and terpenes differently when they go through the liver as opposed to the lungs. So it's a different experience for me. As far as strains, I love, it's I don't know if it's a nationwide strain, but Jack Herrera is a really great, sativa, high energy, creative sativa. XJ13 is another one of mine, which is a combination of Jack Herrera and G13, which is a bit of an indica hybrid. But I really I generally tend to lean into those high energy sativas. And then, if I can't, sometimes smoking cannabis is not convenient. So I like a full spectrum oil, like a live resin oil or a rosin oil, which tend to be give you more of the entourage effect of cannabis than a distillate, which is really just stripping out the THC and combining it maybe with terpenes or some kind of flavor.
Who or what is your current CANNA inspiration, if any?
Current is a good word for me, because I'm constantly, researching and, reading and looking at different aspects of cannabis and creativity. And so daily I switch my inspiration. Recently, I would have to say I've been reading a lot about jazz and jazz musicians and the impact of cannabis on jazz. And the those guys are pretty amazing. They, like Louis Armstrong and his whole crew in the 1930s and 40s, they used cannabis to slow time down, to improvise and to be in the moment. Jazz at that time was it's one of America's original art forms, and it was, in 1940s, jazz musicians were cultural ambassadors for America. And they, even when this sort of cannabis prohibition and propaganda was going on, arrests were being made, they backed off of jazz musicians because of their status as a cultural ambassador. It was really interesting. There's a lot of interesting documentation around whole jazz movement and how it sort of intersects with, Anslinger and all this, anti-cannabis propaganda. So anyway, so lately I'm looking at sort of the whole jazz movement and the impact of cannabis on jazz. It's been inspirational. There's an amazing documentary called Grass is Greener on Netflix by, originally by Freddie, I think it's Barthwaite. I know him as Fab Five Freddy from MTV, Yo MTV Raps. But he's an acquaintance, friend, and he did this amazing documentary on the really impact of music, the history of like cannabis through music. And it's, he starts with jazz and he goes, in hip hop and current music. And it's really a fascinating and, interesting ride through, the world of music and cannabis. So The Grass is Greener. On pilgrimsoul.com, there's a ton of content about cannabis and creativity, and not only, probably about 30% of the articles are on cannabis and creativity, and the rest are just on creative thinking and inspiration and creative hacks.
Last, but definitely not least, what are your life mottos?
Before I put this book together, and I've done a lot of different things, but I also wrote a series called The Guide to Laughing at Life. They're kind of like quote books. They're books of inspirations or observations and inspirations that poignantly make light of life. So I have one book, the Guide to Laughing at Sex, the Guide to Laughing at Family, and the Guide to Laughing at Love. And really, so because of a short attention span growing up, I read quote books. Like I could focus on a quote. It was the most amount of thought per square word, essentially. But memorizing really hundreds of thousands of quotes. My two favorite that I kind of live my life by are, where there's an open mind, there's always a frontier. So we've sort of reflected on that a little bit throughout our conversation, but always being open to perspective and a search for perspective and trying things and experimenting. And then the hedge to where there's an open mind, there's always a frontier. There's another quote that only the insane take themselves seriously. You need to laugh at yourself. You can't take yourself too seriously, especially if you're experimenting and looking at trying new things. Like, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to do stupid things, and you just need to be able to laugh at yourself. And those two things together are kind of how I live my life. Always open to new ideas. My opinions are merely based on precedent. Should new information come in, I am apt to change them. And then to laugh at myself, because, that's really where life's enjoyment is, all about. Laughing with yourself, laughing at yourself, laughing with friends.
To learn more about Shawn and Pilgrim Soul, go to pilgrimsoul.com or pilgrimsoulcannabis.com.